Good evening, everyone. It is May 11th, 2021, and the time is now 6:01 p.m. I now call this meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020, this meeting of the Urban Design Commission is conducted via remote participation. We will make recordings available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. My name is Dan Bartman, and I've been designated by the Planning Director, Sarah Lewis, to co-chair tonight's meeting in her place. With me is Courtney Kirk, who is designated by the Public Space and Urban Forestry Director as tonight's other co-chair. We will start tonight with a roll call of the commission members present. Frank Valdez. We didn't hear you, Frank. We can't hear you.
Present.
There you go. Heidi?
Present.
And Tim?
Present.
Thank you all. Not with us tonight are member Fennick, Deborah Fennick, and Andrew Arbaugh. Andrew would be conflicted out of Boynton Yards anyway, so we just told him not to come. Our first matter of business for tonight is the approval of meeting minutes. We have 4 of them from February 23rd, March 9th, March 23rd, and April 13th. Do we have any comments from the members of the commission on any of the meeting minutes?
No comments.
Nope.
I'll be honest, I didn't have a chance to I didn't see them. I didn't review them.
All right, do you want to take a chance to, I mean, approving them is not a time sensitive thing, but if you'd like time, we can do that. If not, 2 at votes is at least a majority for approving the minutes, but that's up to the 3 of you.
If you want a chance to read them and do it next time, that's okay.
That's fine. Okay. So we will table the approval of meeting minutes until the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks from tonight. And that takes us to our first design review agenda item, Boynton Yards Master Plan Building number 2. Andrew, can I get a raise of hands from everyone speaking tonight? Andrew, this is at least Rolla and Victor. And Ian?
Yeah, as we requested last time, I think we should show our faces, right?
If we could get every speaker to turn their camera on, at least when they're talking, that'd be appreciated.
Frank, it's really hard to hear you.
Okay.
And while Frank works on his audio, I will turn it over to Rolla and Victor. And if everyone else could mute when you're not talking, feel free to take it away.
Thank you all for being here and having us again. We are excited to be here. We've made some updates to the building based on the comments we got last time. And those are mainly looking at our base as well as penthouse, a bit on the circulation of how you get up that slope green and come back down on Windsor. We took a look at materiality as well for the building itself, selected a facade direction. So those are some of the points. I'll let Victor present, and we actually have those on a slide, so we can go over that, and then we are open to any questions or discussion along the way, but thank you.
Okay, super. Thanks everyone for meeting with us. Heidi, it's nice to meet you. I'm sorry we missed you last time. We had a really good conversation. And just to back up a little bit, we reviewed the building, and I'll go into a little bit about the building, but it was really about developing building 2 as an integrated kind of project with an integrated civic space and landscape that was a real part of the building. And I sort of liken that to thinking about the way in which the landscape is really shaking hands with the architecture. So that was a big part of our conversation last time. So we'll talk a little bit about the comments from the committee last time, which were extraordinarily helpful and really productive feedback. And so to that end, talking about this public stair on the southwest corner at Windsor and South Street, the development of the raised cycle track, to Rola's point, the evolution of the material studies on the podium. And the comments there were that the podium was a little bit too sterile, and that it could be a little bit more human scale, have a little bit more warmth. And so we'll go into how we studied that. Deborah was interested in potentially how we were beginning to light the buildings. So looking at a very preliminary lighting study from Lamb, and then going into our preferred facade concept, we'll quickly reiterate the 3 facade concepts we showed last time. And then the last major comment was the scale of the penthouse. And I will sort of parenthetically note that this is a lab building, and we've worked really hard to reduce the scale of the penthouse, but given that it's a LEED Platinum lab building, there's a lot of kind of mechanical infrastructure that goes into both a lab building and making a building LEED Platinum. And then lastly, the view from Prospect Hill. So the landscape, just to reorient everybody, north is up. We're looking at.
Sure, we can't see your screen.
Oh, you're not seeing my screen.
I can you guys? Yeah.
All that.
Hey, Victor, you
I
should be able to share your screen now.
I thought I'd shared it already. So let me just back up. So this was the preamble that I was kind of speaking to, just so you can see it. The plan landscape update, the podium design studies, our preferred podium material, the lighting study from Lamb, preferred facade concept, the penthouse, and the view from Prospect Hill. So here is our ground floor plan. To the right and the east, you're seeing the development of the civic space that we reviewed last time at the Urban Design Committee meeting. And then this starts to kind of speak to the way in which the landscape really kind of is integrated with the architecture. And a big piece of that Ian spoke to last time to the north is the very kind of broad public space that is developed on the north facade, and how the building kind of steps back. There's an arcade there that then becomes this public space, potentially a future cafe space, or even a kind of market. As you wrap around the building from the north to the east, and we'll look at all of views in 3D as we move forward, there's a space that here is labeled market or arts creative space. We call that, the nomenclature for it is a kind of winter market. And we've seen that as a kind of indoor, outdoor public space that could be a winter market, could be a summer market, maybe it's a restaurant, any number of things could happen to that, but the kind of critical piece of it is the way in which that space opens up to the civic, to the public park. As you wrap around the building, what you're seeing is a bike room, and over the bike room is a sloped green space that then connects the upper levels of a kind of public terrace to the civic space. And to the lower left-hand corner of this building, where you're seeing labeled stair in yellow, is a development that had sort of kind of eroded out of the project last time we met, which was a public stair. And following comments from the commission last time, we really redoubled our efforts to think about how this stair works and about the connection from Windsor and South Street up to this public terrace, and then consequently to the sloped green. So on level 2, you see here that connection of the public stair, how that can lead people up to this public terrace. The public terrace then connects to this sloped green, which is this green landscaped element that then in turn connects to the civic space, the public park. And what's labeled lobby, and I'll flip back to level 1, you begin to see in kind of brighter yellow here, the public lobby connection that then connects to a large public stair that then leads up to an arts creative space, a public lobby, and then this exterior public terrace that overlooks the public park. And you'll start to see some more images of that as we go forward. The upper floors are lab buildings, so this is the kind of typical floor plate. The insets architecturally are meant to be kind of more transparent moments, and our hope is that we program these lab layouts. These more kind of transparent re-entrant corners will be potentially community or gathering spaces within the lab floors. In terms of the landscape, I'll speak for Ian, and Ian can kind of jump in if I get anything wrong. But the big change here is the stair on the southwest corner. And one thing that we're doing is making this a kind of public access, but also a social stair that allows opportunities for people to kind of hanging out. We're putting some planting along that southern edge of the building, and that creates a kind of visual connection from west on the left to east on the right of green space that starts to kind of bind the two sides of the building together to the public park on the east side. The green score is just above the district requirements, and you can see in the left-hand corner how that green space on the public stair starts to contribute to the green score. As we move around the building, we have cycle track, so protected cycleway. This is looking at Windsor Street side on South Street. And then this is really the section from Copley Wolf that is super productive, that really speaks to this green connection now from west on Windsor Street to the east side to the public park, and really underscores the big idea of the project about really the kind of landscape integrating with the architecture, and then also public and community space integrating with the architecture on more than just the ground plane, and really thinking about how to get people up to this public space and these potential arts creative spaces on the upper level. And to the right, you can begin to see how's there this raised planting area that then connects to the public park, creates more opportunities for people to hang out. And just parenthetically, last time we met, Ian talked about all the kind of different ways in which the public park could be programmed and people could participate at this level within that kind of public space. And there's different levels of public space, so different opportunities for people to hang out. And we spoke a little bit about potentially kids kind of rambling up this sloped green up to the upper level terrace, and it's a kind of different sort of space to engage with than you might normally see. This is a really helpful diagram to kind of talk about these ideas that we're developing. So the civic space to the left and the east, in between that, adjacent to the bike room, is this double height winter market or a space, the lobby connection up to the roof terrace, and then to the upper right-hand corner, the public stair. And you can begin to see how in the kind of bright yellow, this public space starts to weave through in and out of the building as a kind of core value for the project. So returning to the podium design, just to reiterate the point before, as we were thinking about the building when we met with the UDC last time, we had the building largely clad in a kind of charcoal aluminum, and this was true at the base as well. And we had liked the sort of, Deborah very nicely called it kind of rigor, but the rigorous approach to the kind of materiality and sort of what we felt was a kind of more minimal approach to the cladding system. I think, after that conversation with Tim and Frank and Deborah, it really became apparent to us that that approach was too cold, too sterile, and just not quite right. So we began to look at other opportunities. And as we do, we like to look at things from different perspectives in different ways. So we studied a kind of working ourselves from gray aluminum to blue aluminum, thinking about kind of aircraft aluminum and that kind of texture, what's called foamed aluminum. And part of that has to do with kind of material studies that we were interested in, which then led further, as those elements weren't quite right, to thinking about brick, and then ultimately to thinking about GFRC, Trespa, or a product like Tactile. So here is where we were roughly 2 weeks ago with the base, the podium base of the building really being sympathetic and perhaps overly sympathetic to the upper mass of the building. Next was thinking about color. So what happens if we change color? Does the change in color to a kind of more metallic, reflective material, a vibrant, deep midnight blue, does that start to do something for us? Not really, but we looked at it. Beginning to think about texture, about foamed aluminum and technology, and ultimately the core concept of the building beyond this idea of creating a sense of community and interlocked building landscape space was about also kind of connecting ideas of art and science and technology. So this idea of kind of textured aircraft aluminum had some appeal, but again, it's also too sterile and not quite right for this project as well. So we looked at brick. First, light gray brick, which really seemed out of character with the palette. And then dark gray brick, which is always appealing, particularly in terms of the color. There's a real kind of nice quality in terms of how it reconciles with the kind of darker aluminum of the larger mass of the building. But as we began to think about it more, it felt right at first, partly because of texture and kind of scale and materiality for people at the base. But it also began to feel a little bit too residential and not quite right, and too kind of disconnected with the larger program of the building, and not right for a lab building, and also maybe not quite right for the overall scale of the building. So we began to think about something that really began to kind of mediate between the larger scale of the building and the scale of the podium base. So to that end, began to think about GFRC and the opportunities that GFRC provide for us. So here you're looking at an articulation of something like Okoskin, where we have hidden clad GFRC panels with perhaps a kind of vertical texture, change in color. So what's great about this is that we can kind of articulate materially something that is a little bit more haptic, a little bit more natural to the touch. It kind of mediates between the scale of the building, but also provides a kind of range, scale, and warmth at the base that starts to feel really appropriate. And so this is definitely our choice at the current moment. And whether that's something like Okoskin or Tactile or some other GFRC material, we're not sure yet, and we'll kind of really dig into that as we go into DDs. But right now, this direction really feels right to us as we kind of worked through those kind of previous studies. This is starting to work. So what you're looking at here is the view from the northwest, AQ Way and the corner of Windsor Street as you're approaching the kind of public face of the building from Union Square. To the left and beyond is towards the civic space and the landscaped park to the east, and to the right and beyond is South Street and that public stair that we were talking about before. As we move around the building to the northeast corner, here you're looking at how the building podium base begins to engage with the winter market. One thing that came up last time was that the volume of the winter market, which is a double height space, had previously only been expressed as a single height space. And Deborah very rightly pointed out, and the rest of the committee, that that was incongruous with what we're trying to do with this interior double height space. So we made this change, and it's been very productive we think for the design. As we move around the building, pulling back into the civic space, you're looking towards the north, built the lobby entry, the articulation of the Winter Market facade, and to the left you can begin to see the raised podium and connection to the sloped green on the southeast corner of the building. And here, as we're kind of moving through the lawn of the civic space, looking towards the Winter Market and the big door that opens up, so you can create this strong inside-outside connection. Moving around to just beyond South Street, you're seeing the edge of the sloped green, the raised landscape podium to the right, and to the left here with the glass is the public bike room of the building. And you can see the public terrace beyond that. And here we're wrapping all the way around at the corner of South Street and Windsor Street, and you're beginning to see the development of the new stair that was put in following our conversation last time. And in the upper left is a sketch from Ian at Copley Wolf talking about how some of this seating area or the edge on the kind of south side can become a kind of planted landscape to soften that edge. There are questions about our plan for lighting, and this is very, very preliminary. And again, we're working with LAM, and the idea is that as we articulate the kind of base of the middle or the kind of podium base of the building, that we have a way of lighting the underside of the ceiling, which will be a kind of warm trespa or something like that, to create this warm plane that then connects us from the north side all the way around the building to create this kind of warm floating surface that is well lit. And again, this is very preliminary. Preferred facade concept. So last time we met, we looked at 3 different ideas for articulating the massing of the building. On the left, facade concept A, which I'll go into in more detail. To the right, facade concept B, which was more of a kind of A to B idea where one half of the building would be more heavily textured with sunshades and mullions, and the other half of the building would be much more glassy. And upon further reflection, this really doesn't afford us the kind of approach that we think works best from both a sustainability and a solar perspective, and that we're creating on the east facade just this kind of unvaried glass facade with no opportunity for sunshades. So that started to seem like it wasn't quite working. And to the right, we had explored an idea of a building that was a lot more metally and had metal articulated spandrels, and that building began to feel too heavy to us. So our preferred concept is definitely A, where there's a kind of good balance between the articulation of the exterior sunshades, the vertical sunshades on the east side and on the south facade, both vertical expression of vertical sunshades and some horizontal sunshades to control some of the daylight infiltration in the building. So here's a close-up of facade concept A. The civic space landscape park is in the foreground. We're on South Street looking towards the northwest. And here you can begin to see a diagram of the enclosure typology with the, as I mentioned previously, in blue, the reentrant corners of the building are more glassy, and our hope is that as the floor plans are developed for those spaces, those will become more kind of community public spaces of the floors. And then what you see in red will be more articulated textured surfaces on the building. In elevation, you can see the south elevation here, the east elevation facing the civic space to the right, the north facade, and then the west elevation to the right facing Windsor Street. And here's some kind of the enclosure typology diagram. So as we look at the south facade, we have kind of every other unit of the curtain wall has a articulated deeper vertical to work as a sunshade, and then at a clerestory level, we have a horizontal sunshade to reduce the amount of glare on the interior. as we move around the building, conceptually, which we discussed last time, we call this concept for the building an open book. It was one of the kind of 3 building concepts that we had studied. And we have this idea of these spines, which are in the center of these facades. And those spines are a little bit more kind of glassy moments that you can see articulated in blue. Here you see those glassy reentrant community corners that we've been thinking about along the facade. And then for both the north and the west, a little bit different type of articulation than we had on the east penthouse. So a big part of our conversation last time was the scale of the penthouse and the kind of heaviness of the penthouse. So you can see it here. It was pretty big. We were cladding it with a darker material. As I noted previously, we had this idea of a kind of unified palette from top to bottom. And that idea really made the penthouse look super heavy. Working with BR+A over the last couple of weeks, we've been able to push and pull a little bit and squeeze the penthouse much more in from the west and the east sides to reduce the overall apparent scale of the building. We've also added different levels of horizontal and vertical articulation. So just to kind of jump back and forth, we had a cornice at the very top of the penthouse, and we began to see that that cornice at the very top began to make the facade very heavy. And we began to think about kind of the idea of weaving a little bit more in terms of how we articulated the penthouse. So taking some of these verticals and stopping them short and having a kind of more prominent horizontal at the top rather than a very heavy cornice, and then lightening up the material overall. So as a first step, this began to feel like it was really reducing the overall scale of the penthouse and lightening it up a lot. As we move forward, started to think about differentiating the top band as a even lighter, perhaps a more kind of silver metallic metal to play with scale. And I think this even starts to help even more in terms of reducing the apparent scale of the penthouse. Taking that a little bit further, creating a kind of gradient in the articulation of the penthouse, which I think is another step further in reducing the overall scale. And then option D, starting to weave in some more kind of silver verticals to create a little bit more activity and texture on the penthouse structure. So that's sort of where we're landed. And then the last is a look from the Prospect Hill skyline. So as you're on the kind of upper terrace overlooking the road that goes up to Prospect Hill and the monument, there's a kind of bank of trees, and you can see the US 2 development to the right and building 2 in the scale of the city's skyline right there in the middle of the screen. So that was, I hope, not too brisk and helpful. And Heidi, I hope I gave you enough background information about the kind of prior conversation to give you a sense of the overall building. Questions, comments? Do you want me to kind of back through the slides again?
Thank you, Victor. We'll definitely take votes on all of the options of things that you showed, so that you have at least direction on each one of those. But I'll open it up to the voting commissioners to start.
I want to say that the way that you responded, I think it's great.
Frank, it's really, really hard to hear you.
Because we were so far away, we can get any better now.
You're still very like echoey and crunchy sounding. You will?
I'm gonna mute myself and try to do the headphone.
Okay.
Okay.
somebody else.
Heidi or Tim, do you want to go first?
Does this work better?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, much better.
Perfect, Frank. Thank you.
Can anybody hear me now?
Fantastic.
No. I have so much trouble with this when I do these things with you guys. I apologize. Victor, I just wanted to say thank you for taking all of the comments into consideration that you did. I think that the development of the new stair connection is really great. I think that it's going to be a great space, and I think that taking that into consideration and connecting the people to move forward, and just so Heidi, that you know, one of the main comments that we said was that that street component is such a back of house, but that's still a sidewalk. So the entire thing is a back of house. So people walking would be walking within the back of a building, be in service. So the idea of elevating a public space and bringing it up and bringing it back down and bringing people through the building was an elegant way of doing it and a better way of doing it and expanding the public space. I think that you've done that a great job, and I think that I appreciate your response on it, Victor. I think that it was great. The material options that you presented as well, the exploration, I appreciate them. I think that I tend to agree with you. I think the brick looks funny, and I think that the metal is cold. So your exploration of the aqua skin or the tactile panel, I think is definitely a direction to go to. I would lean more towards the aqua skin versus the tactile. I think that I'm using the tactile right now in a bunch of projects, and it has a lot of challenges.
Okay. We'll have to talk offline about that, Frank. And
not only that, you also have to purchase a certain amount of linear feet.
Yeah.
You can't just buy what you want. They say you have to buy this. So
that's good to know.
It's a great product, but I think that it has its challenges. And the aqua skin has a lot more potential in exploration. And I think that in my recommendation, you should explore that further, because I think that you will get some of the components that you're seeking in that. And the exploration of the penthouse. Look, I do lots of lab buildings as well. 20, 30-foot penthouses for lab buildings of this scale are necessary, and it's you can't hide them, and it's hard to hide them. You try to do something good, and I think that we need to work on it. And I think that you did a great job with it. You have to do a platinum building, and therefore it is a reality. Mm-hmm. But I think that you've taken it to a right direction, and I'm very happy with where you took all of these components to, by the way. And I know that there's challenges, but thank you for what you've done.
No, thank you for your fantastic feedback last time. It was really helpful for the building. So appreciate that.
Yeah, I really appreciate the refinements as well. And they really are refinements. I think you started from a very strong place. And several of the refinements have made, I think, the building a better building, stronger public realm. They're improvements. I have several kind of more detailed comments to that end. I also appreciate the addition of the stair on the southwestern corner. I think that's key, both now creating access from multiple points up to that upper level public space, but also in the future too, when this public space is extended to the south, having the ability to connect on that side. I think that's going to make Windsor Street a much more important and prominent street. One of the things I noticed just in looking at, I think, the image from the northeast corner, looking down there, is that from Curry Way, now, that stair isn't really visible. And I wonder if there's a way to maybe just bring that a little farther west or do something at that corner to make that a special moment and make the fact that there's a stair there visually apparent from north from Quarry Way. And I think, I know the facade facing Windsor Street, that's a service side of the building now, and I think that's fine. But it may help give a little more life to that side of the building as well.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I appreciate the changes to the market volume. The two-story volume feels much better in proportion to the overall building, but also facing onto the public space as well. It's much more of a presence. And I love the idea of being able to open this up to the park there, the open space, the big retractable door there. And looking at the overall diagram you have of the ground level, the idea of this lobby, the stair in the lobby, the connection to the upper level, I wonder about the connection between the market space and the lobby itself as a way of activating the lobby. And I think of One Broadway, for example, in Kendall Square, the connection between Shy Bird, the restaurant, and the lobby space there. It's not the whole wall doesn't open up, but it's enough of a connection to make them feel like one space, and there's a bleeding of activity between the two. So I think if the intent is to really have this these spaces be porous and connected, looking at ways of connecting those would be great.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
I agree with Frank on the materiality. I've also looked at the tactile product. It can be challenging. I think that in looking at the Oco skin, the images you showed seem to imply a texture to it. I'd really think about that and how, because it's coming to the ground and somebody's going to be able to come up and touch that, what that texture means at grade when someone's touching it. But I think it's a direction that'll be rich for future exploration.
Great, thank you.
Continue well with it. I think I'm not completely sold on the penthouse yet, though. And I appreciate the refinements that you've done in looking at the materiality of it, but I feel like I wonder if there's the potential to think more volumetrically about it in 3 dimensions. You did the view from Prospect Hill. From up on the tower from Prospect Hill, you can kind of look out and see Kendall Square. You get this vantage point of Kendall Square. You're looking down on it. And you see all the buildings, how they've treated the top. And there's a lot of kind of interesting examples of how the necessary volume of the penthouse, maybe it's 35 feet. I know some of the Kendall Square buildings, Pfizer's 55 feet. How they treat that volume. And there's a lot of examples where the facade of the building is carried up onto the penthouse. Maybe not all the way up, but in part. I'm thinking of the Alchemies building with the 3 kind of stepping volumes. I think it's a recent tall building. The Broad Institute, the taller Broad Institute, where the facade comes all the way to the top on part of it, but then part of the penthouse is expressed as its own volume. There's kind of that interlocking of volumes. Kendall Square.
Yeah, that was actually one direction that we did explore early on. So actually Victor has an image of that. But our question there was in terms of zoning guidelines, once you bring the facade up, is that, because it's considered mechanical penthouse, and does that have to be inset from the outside skin? So then that kind of becomes blurred, which may be a good thing, but we just weren't sure if that passes once you're saying mechanical penthouse needs to be inset from the facade. So that's one thing we weren't sure about.
The other big challenge we had with that idea was that some of the components, dairy handlers, for example, are multiple story height, and even with bringing the facade up, we weren't able to get it to work properly. Like, we could sort of shove some of the kind of smaller scale equipment to the perimeter, but we were still challenged in terms of the massing of the penthouse. So it it wasn't getting very efficient. It was getting very inefficient, essentially.
Even though
Basically, you're putting like a facade, but then you have to also put a facade behind that to cover the mechanical equipment, right? So
Yeah,
it's almost-
and then it was just the way in which the mechanical equipment related. What it was doing was creating a very tall, like top floor, which started to mess with the overall scale of the building. So while it did reduce the overall scale of the penthouse, it reduced the height of the top of the building, kind of the building middle, significantly. So it started to become kind of problematic. I mean, I totally understand what you were saying. What we've done as a strategy is try to, again, given the kind of LEED Platinum condition, make it as kind of tight into the shape that we're showing as possible, which doesn't allow us to play with the kind of three-dimensionality of the penthouse so much, because everything is kind of, we've got 50 pounds of potatoes stuffed in a 30-pound sack, basically, and there's not much room to kind of play with that.
Well, I think the zoning question's an interesting one. I'd love to hear Dan and the city's take on that. I would think that if the facade of the building is to extend up and become the facade of the penthouse or part of the penthouse, that would create additional flexibility, essentially enlarging the size of the penthouse.
I think my fear of something like that would be from a, I see what you're saying, Tim, and I think that I've looked at that as well. And I think that the challenge that we've gotten into that is in Cambridge, it becomes also you're supporting that additionally because there's no building behind it, right? You're just bringing the facade up. If you bring the facade up, how are you supporting that, right? And what are the supports for it? And I think that, Victor, maybe one of the things that the renderings do is that you show it so dark in the materiality, and perhaps the color and the materiality that you're choosing is showing it to be so heavy. And maybe thinking about it in a lighter component, and maybe
so go even lighter than we already have. Okay.
It seems heavy in the renderings, and maybe in the end it's not that way, but the way that you see it is that you see it. And I know that this is part of what a lab is, and hiding it is always, people ask, and it's a challenge, because it comes with cost, and it comes with structural components, and it becomes with additional things, and maybe it's just a lighter thing. And
yeah, I think that definitely is the intention. It is to not to go to a black, and that was one of the things that we were struggling with rendering wise, just because it's last minute and done in-house. But I think what we want to do is go from a dark gray to a very light gray, but it's shown as black here, but I think that would be the intent. The other thing we were kind of playing with as well is our base materials, so the OCO panels or whatever GFRC material we use, we wanted to play with a gradient there as well. So the idea is maybe we're playing with the idea of a gradient of grays, which happens both on base and on top. How that happens on top is not 100% resolved. So you'll see here right now it's a horizontal banding. But one other thing we were kind of talking about is what if we bring a very light gray to form vertical bands as well, just to break down that scale further. But again, what you're seeing here, I think, are the beginnings of ideas, and the black is not absolutely not going to be black. I think we want to do a gray that goes to a very light gray. So I think you're right there.
And Dan, I think I would say that as a condition, because they have to build a mock-up, right, of this.
They will probably as a high rise anyway, but we can use it for reviewing materiality later on.
Right. I think that as a requirement for the mock-up, it would be to have a pretty large piece component that includes the penthouse as part of that development. A lot of times we don't see that, like the one that we did for building 1, there was no penthouse that we approved, for it. And I think that I would say for this case, I would say that when the mock-up is being built, that we see a part of the penthouse as well
Yep.
as part of the mock-up.
I
Okay.
think that's a great suggestion, Frank. I mean, I think one of the challenges of this process is that we go very quickly from the neighborhood community meeting level to this meeting. And as we get into DD now, we really have time to kind of dig into the materiality of the penthouse and the way in which the penthouse is articulated, which we haven't fully had time to kind of completely vet right now. The massing of it overall is correct in terms of everything fits, but the way in which we start to break down that massing is really a kind of DD level study. And to Rola's point, we can really start to study about how to kind of deal with the gradient, working with lighter materials and thinking about changing materials even.
Correct.
And I appreciate the challenges of working out the penthouse. I guess solving the functional issues of actually fitting the equipment that's necessary, the air handlers, the exhaust air handlers, and getting them to work. But I still think there's an opportunity not just to kind of solve the functional issues, but to reinforce what I think is a really elegant architectural idea, this idea of the unfolding book. You have there's two facade types now, and we had a diagram showing that earlier, that end in the same horizontal plane at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's the possibility of extending one of those up to cover part of the penthouse. So it isn't just the same, there's, a horizontal datum across at the top of both facade types, but one is extending above the other.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, actually.
And, it doesn't have to be the full 35 feet or whatever it is. It could be one story. Also looking at Novartis, the Novartis buildings in Cambridge. They take the whole top story of the building as their first mechanical level. So it's the exact same architectural skin as what's below, but they just bring it up a story and they use that to reduce the apparent height of the penthouse. So maybe that's a way to.
Okay, we can look at that again.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think, and I really liked your idea, Rola, of how do you, maybe there's a balance between the way that the building meets the ground and the building meets the sky, and that there's some kind of it's almost like the building is passing through this clear skin. And I think that for a penthouse like this, it's like either you try to minimize it or you try to celebrate it. And I feel like we're trying to celebrate it, which I think is the right thing to do. This building, it's not a building that's really trying to hide anything or be something other than what it is. So I think that's the right approach, is to I agree with my colleagues' statements about what the next level of detail is for this. Makes a lot of sense to me. And I also really appreciate the material studies that you did for this and showing us your work and kind of stepping through the different materials, and agree that where we've ended up with this kind of texture around the bottom grade makes a lot of sense, especially in contrast to the glass above. I really like the way that's coming out. I did have a chance to watch the video from last week, so I'm not completely in the dark. And I think that the stair, that public stair kind of passing through, is also a really great addition to this, and it'll be really interesting as a person to kind of experience that in the building. I think one question I had was about how on the market side, how the building is meeting the ground and what the experience of people who are in the park is of that building. And there's a couple things that kind of popped into my mind as I was looking at that. One is there any other way that we can treat the columns at the exterior of this building? Is there a possibility that we can add some texture to that, or maybe align it a little bit more closely to the material that we're using on the building?
Yep, absolutely. Again, this is all kind of DD. As we get into DDs, we'll really be able to kind of chew on these kind of conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And just looking at that facade, I felt like, I love that you've got this I completely agree with the double height space, that really makes sense for this. I wonder when we're looking at the entries that go into that space, if those sort of, there was one view that showed the kind of regular height doors that have a little awning over them.
Yep.
That felt a little, again, like as you guys get through DD, just start to articulate what that experience is of people actually at the ground level, like whether you like, do you want the building to feel like, yeah, like a lab building, or do we want it to feel a little bit more human scale? And I also very much appreciate those big open doors. This facade feels a little building scale rather than human scale, and maybe there's just a way that bottom band kind of gets articulated slightly differently, or maybe those awnings get a little bit more expressed. Just something that feels a little like, I don't know, a little bit like you got a lab building right next to a park.
Got it.
And I think that that's not really what the programming intent is for that ground level. And there's a project that I'm working on right now where we have one of these big garage doors, and we did have some struggles with programming the interior space because there's certain code requirements about how far you're allowed to program up to a garage door, a big open door. So that's something that I would ask you guys to look at. Yeah, it was for a restaurant that I'm working on, and we ended up having to do something different because you're not allowed to program with it. We weren't allowed to program within like 10 feet of the opening if it was a food space. It's
Oh, that's
very
interesting. Okay.
unfortunate. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's just something to
We'll
keep.
dig into that. Thank you.
Yeah. 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 I find and maybe this is just a taste thing, but I find sort of the bike view entrance to be the most interesting in this facade as it moves around the building, like how you're starting to have that materiality, and it feels like very human scale. And I'm not suggesting that you do that exact same thing here, but there's a human scale for me that's a little bit missing from the way that, from that skin that separates the kind of the public realm from the exterior realm from the interior.
Great.
I mean, maybe what might help here is to bring that band around, all the way around, even though it's double height. But perhaps bringing in the band of GFRC to this space above those doors may help reduce the scale of that space. It's just one option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it makes sense, that could be an option for sure.
We looked at that prior to developing this view, and the problem was it was creating kind of indeterminacy, but I think we're not quite there yet, honestly. And again, this is another thing to really kind of work on through DD as we dig into the details.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe it's just the curtain wall. Maybe the curtain wall is just a different, maybe just a smaller scale, or more horizontal, or just there's more mullions, or there's just a way of just creating more of a separation from the rest of the building.
Yeah.
And as we're talking this through, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I agree, Heidi. I think it's a good comment. I'm glad you talked about it. I think the scale of the volume feels good, right? But maybe it really is just a materiality thing that it feels. Yeah, I mean, this view, it feels kind of coplanar with what's above, even though I know it's not.
Yeah.
Just too similar with the floor above.
Yeah. And maybe there's and again, just thinking about the penthouse, like maybe there is some kind of a grandeur alignment with the building, the bottom of the building and the top of the building, that hasn't quite been discovered yet. Just as a kind of an overall move through the building, that could be really powerful.
Yeah, I like the way you talked about it, this balance between the ground and the sky, and it kind of moves through the clear skin. It's a very kind of poetic way of putting it.
Oh, thanks. But yeah, otherwise, I don't really have any further comments.
Could we take a look at the north side elevation again?
So the north side is planar, has no horizontal sunshades, and just kind of finely articulated verticals every other curtain wall module.
Okay,
So if our overall structural module is on a 22-foot, our curtain wall module is on both an 11-foot and a 5'6" bay. So you're seeing the articulation of the verticals kind of straddling the kind of primary structural. And so we're getting a kind of AB rhythm that we're trying to set up between the kind of primary structural axis on the facade and the articulation of the curtain wall.
okay. No, thank you. When you had paged through them earlier, I had thought perhaps they were the same on the south and the north, and I thought that would be.
Yeah, the south has a lot more texture to it.
That makes sense. The spine of the two leaves, is that coplanar with the, so those two glazing modules, are they coplanar with?
No, it's actually inset slightly. I'll go to the plan.
Or Victor, the axon shows it best, I think.
Oh yeah, thank you. So the detail of it, you can see here where we look at the spines, there's a little bit of an inset and a change in plane to the more kind of glassy vertical that you can see here. And that change of plane is then accentuated with the vertical articulation that you see left and right of the center spine of the open book concept. And then just as a kind of parenthetical note, if the building middle is the glass curtain wall, there's the articulation of a lower cornice, we're calling aluminum coping, and a top cornice of the building to kind of clearly define the podium base and the middle top that leads to the penthouse.
Okay. No, thank you. I think conceptually that sounds great. I just and this is really a DD level comment too, but as you refine kind of that detail at the intersection between the spine and the leaves next to it, and look at how far that's set back, I'd encourage you to kind of think about how legible it is from a distance.
Yeah, that's a great point. Appreciate that.
Any other feedback from the other commissioners? So I guess the first fundamental question is intent to vote tonight or not. There are five votes. We didn't take a formal vote on the massing option at the last meeting, so we would need to do that as a formality. But then the facade design options, the team presented us with 4 penthouse options. The design guidelines for the high-rise district, and then to recommend your additional feedback provided this evening are the votes that need to take place.
So if he doesn't have the massing, I'm trying to remember which option we chose to direct you to.
We chose the open book. Last time I showed you the 3 massing options, what was called the link, book. And then the origami, and then the open book.
Got it, open book, right.
Yep.
And so can you, Dan, can you go through them again?
Yep, the 5 votes needed are on the massing option, which was option 3, open book was the direction we provided previously. The facade design option, there were 3 presented. There were 4 penthouse options. And then the 2 required votes. So massing and facade design are required, and then design guidelines if they've been satisfied for the HR district, and then to incorporate any feedback provided this evening. The penthouse one is a bonus if you would like to take that up for vote.
Why don't we start with the massing, which is the open book. I vote for it. I think that that's the option and direction that we should take on for the massing option.
All right, I
Second.
hear a motion from Frank to select massing option 3, which was open book, seconded by Heidi. We'll do a roll call. Frank Valdez,
Yes.
Heidi Cron,
Yes.
and Tim Talon.
Yes.
And that would bring us to any of the other 4 in any order.
So now we have the
Design,
facade design. And I think that we all tend to agree on the direction of the facade design is going in the right direction. I would vote to approve that.
which is option A,
Option A.
if I remember it, Victor.
Yes, that's correct, Dan.
Right, Frank motions to select option A for facade design. Do we have a second?
Second.
Tim seconds. We'll do a roll call. Frank Valdez,
Yes.
Heidi Cron,
Yes.
and Tim Talon.
Yes.
That also passes unanimously. Next up was the team's presented penthouse options, which we did have an extensive discussion about.
Right. Can we go to the next one, which would be the design guidelines?
Sure.
So-
The next question would be: does the project satisfy the high-rise design guidelines?
I would say that yes, the project does satisfy the high-rise guidelines.
All right. Commissioner Valdez proposes that the design guidelines have been satisfied. Do we have a second?
I guess just a point of clarification. How would the penthouse options relate to this?
Well, I was leaving that for the last one, so that would be the one that would probably have further development. Tim, I would say that
So
the
is your
guidelines have
question
been
like,
met.
so is your question like whether we can sign off on whether it's whether it's satisfied the design guidelines if we're not going to approve the penthouse at this time?
Well, the guidelines have been met. I think that we have comments on the penthouse that we would like potentially to see as either conditions or something else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. That makes sense.
So
I don't see a design guideline specifically related to the mechanical penthouse.
correct.
So you would be able to procedurally approve that they've been satisfied without causing an issue.
Right. So again, I would say that the design guidelines for the high rise have been met.
Okay, do we have a second on Frank's motion that the design guidelines have been met?
I'll second.
Seconded by Heidi. Roll call vote. Frank Valdez,
Yes.
Heidi Cron,
Yes.
and Tim Talon.
Yes.
Design guidelines in the HR district has been satisfied, unanimous. And last required one is to recommend incorporation of your feedback provided tonight into the final design presented to the planning board, which
Right.
you can just say so moved because it's a mouthful.
Correct. So moved. So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Tim Talon. Roll call vote. Frank,
Yes.
Heidi,
Yes.
and Tim.
Yes.
That is also unanimous, which leaves us just to the question of the penthouse.
So again, I don't know, Tim and Heidi, how you feel. I think that there's further exploration that needs to happen. I don't think they need to come back and show us, another design of the penthouse. I think that Tim, you made a lot of good comments on it, and Heidi as well on it. I think that Victor and Rolla should take some of these components and we put them in conditions that they should explore further these components of the penthouse as conditions for, and that will be explored further. And Dan, I don't know how you word it so that we have an opportunity to also review that either as they send us drawings or something so that they can continue in the process. Let's not hold them up, but we would like to see perhaps drawings or incorporate them as well in selection in the mock-up as well. I think that we want to incorporate some of those things that when we see the mock-up, we want to see that.
That's a helpful direction, I think. we'll need
Yeah, I
time
would
to
agree.
incorporate
I
this.
think I'd like to see this project move forward as well in the process. And I think we could, further development could be presented. I think there's a neighborhood meeting to come. There's an additional neighborhood meeting. And then ultimately to the planning board.
Yep, agreed.
So I guess the question would be, would the commission like to provide them any feedback on any of the options shown? We've met the statutory requirements for moving them forward. So I guess that would be if you favor one of the options over another one, or if you would just generally like to see further development or outside of those options, you don't have to take up a vote if not.
I mean, I think that there's plenty of commentary that was put forth for Victor to provide. I think Tim talked about the idea what happens if you bring the facade slightly up to reduce the scale of the penthouse, you know, from 35 feet to 25 feet by, you know, mitigating the facade, changing the materiality perhaps does something. So, I mean, it's just really, I mean, it's minimus, I mean, I think, but I think that it's worth exploration and worth us looking at it. But
Yeah,
we don't need to give any more guidelines than that. I think that they heard it, they understand it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the feedback was very helpful. I thought we had a very robust conversation about it with a lot of different ideas. So there's certainly enough material for us to kind of go back and look at a number of options for the penthouse.
Keeping in mind, Victor, that we also need to look at the mock-up at a certain point that we can reject
Absolutely.
the mock-up.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. The mock-up is going to be critical.
Right, so I think that as we move forward, think about how the mock-up is presented, the penthouse is presented within the mock-up, and if there are options that you want to bring forth so that we can see some of those things as well in the mock-up and go, you know what, now that I look at it, that looks better versus that and blah, blah, blah. Right?
That's a fantastic idea. And I think, you know, just intuitively, some kind of combination of the different ideas that were expressed, your and Tim's suggestion to bring the curtain wall up a little bit higher to reduce the apparent scale of the penthouse is a good one. Heidi's idea of really kind of balancing the ground and the sky. I think we can do a kind of combination of things as we jump forward. So there's a lot for us to kind of work with now.
So one question, is there a date for the mock-up? Is there like a requirement on when that should be ready? And my question is only that because would it be a good idea to send you guys, say, a PDF of options before we hit go on the mock-up?
Yes, the mock-up rollout does not happen until you start construction.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's going to be a while. So I just want
to. It is going to be a while.
Yeah. So maybe we you know, we do a PDF of updated options based on your feedback, and then we, you know, bring you guys with you in on what we decide to do for a mock-up as well.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, most buildings of this scale end up with 2 permit conditions about having the UDC review the materials for comment, and also constructing the mock-up and having the UDC provide feedback once they're put together.
But I think,
go ahead.
I was going to say rollout's a very good thing to say, actually. Provide some drawings as to what the mock-up is going to be, so you're not spending money on something that is not necessary, but let us see what you're thinking of building, and that then the committee can look at and comment as to what they want to see before you build it.
Yeah,
I think that would be very helpful.
Because that can happen soon, and just because, I mean, you guys know what it takes to build a mock-up and the process and like requiring material and also. So I think that'd be helpful. We'll send you guys an update and then we can move forward.
Great.
So Frank, Andrew and I will write up all of these recommendations related to the penthouse and incorporate them into the recommendation from the commission, and we won't take a vote on any of the 4 penthouse options. That sound good? Okay.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Then that brings us to the end of the show, Victor and Rolla. Congratulations. Okay. So we will work on getting you a written recommendation as soon as possible. And I would suggest beginning to coordinate with Councilor Scott on getting neighborhood meeting number 2 as soon as possible.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Victor.
and-
Thank you, Rolla. Great
Thank you,
presentation.
guys.
Thank you.
No, thanks
Yep.
to
Thank
all
you.
of you. And
you.
Dan, thank you again for all your support during this process. It's really
No problem.
helped smooth things out for us. I really appreciate it. So,
Great.
and
Sure.
thank you for the conversation today. This was great. Really helpful for us.
Awesome.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Rolla.
All right.
Thanks,
both.
everyone. Take care.
That brings us to our last item of business, which is actually not on the agenda because we are sad to learn that Heidi is leaving us as a commission member. Tim, I made the same face when I found out. But
No.
tonight is Heidi's last meeting with us.
Heidi, you just joined us. Where are you going?
I know. I didn't intend it for it to be this way. And I actually thought I was going to be here for the May 25th meeting, but my schedule got moved up and I have to go see my parents before I move. So I'm moving to New York City. Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's something that, thank you. And it's something that was not even, oh, you guys are still here. It's something that was not even on my radar when I joined the commission at all. And it just kind of came up in April, and it was an offer that I couldn't refuse. It's, I'm basically keeping the same job that I have now, but I'm moving to the New York office. So,
Great.
yeah, it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, and I know it was kind of a bummer because I feel like I worked hard to get on the commission, and it was like shorter than I intended, but
You're just
I really enjoyed.
you're just going back to where you're going back to where I came from.
Oh, really?
They say that there's
Are you
two
from-
types of people in Boston: the people who are from Boston and the people who got stuck going back to New York City.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm from here, and I've always wished that I was there. So there you go.
There you go. Well, congratulations.
Except I'll always be a Red Sox fan. That's like that's not going to change. You know. Yeah, I know.
I'm with you, Frank.
I know. But I really want to thank you guys for
Thank
the
you.
last. This has been a great experience, and it's just it's weird. Like I'm sad to go, but I know that it's the right thing for me to do right now. So
Great. Heidi,
Oh,
congratulations and good luck.
Congratulations.
thank you, and I'm sorry
Yeah.
the others aren't here. I wasn't expecting this to be my last night. I thought I'd have another round. So I'm sorry that the others aren't here, and I won't see them again.
Great.
There have been whole relationships that have happened across Zoom or GoToMeeting that have happened because of the pandemic. But we're glad that you were here with us, even though some of us only met you virtually. So thank you for your time on the commission. I very much appreciated you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
That leaves us with a motion to adjourn, and I think we should nominate Heidi to.
Heidi, go for it.
I motion to adjourn.
I
We have a
second.
second. Seconded by Frank. Roll call. Frank Valdez.
Yes.
Heidi Cron's last vote,
Yes. Oh.
and Tim Talon.
Yes.
We are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
All right.
All
All right, you
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
care.
Thank
Stick
you.
around.
Hey,
Bye.
Heidi, it's good meeting you
Thank you,
virtually.
guys.
I wish we could have done it
You
in person.
too.
Have a good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
Tim. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.